The divine connection between Cleopatra and Isis could be the way to reveal her tomb.
For 2,000 years, we believed she was a beauty incarnate, the seductress who conquered Rome with her charm. But new DNA evidence shatters that illusion completely. What if Cleopatra wasn't a goddess at all? What if she were a walking genetic catastrophe, hiding behind cosmetics and chemistry? Scientists finally analyzed bones connected to her bloodline, and the results are horrifying. Her family didn't just marry cousins, they married siblings, generation after generation. The inbreeding coefficient? Over 45%. To understand what that means, look at Charles II of Spain at 25%. He couldn't even chew his food, his body had no blood, and his heart was the size of a peppercorn. Cleopatra was nearly double that level. She should have been a monster. So how did she rule an empire? How did she seduce Julius Caesar and Mark Antony? Was she a one-in-a-million miracle? Or was she secretly suffering, masking deformities with makeup, numbing pain with opium, and using every chemical trick available to project an illusion of perfection?
Cleopatra's father, allegiance. Everything that he's worked for as king, all of it is invested in Cleopatra and making sure that she comes to power in a secure Egypt.
The truth is darker than Hollywood ever showed you. Stay with us, because what we're about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about history's most famous queen. The family secret nobody talked about. Walk into any museum and you'll see Cleopatra's face staring back at you, engraved on coins, carved into stone, painted on frescoed walls. Her features have become timeless, iconic, a symbol of beauty and power. Yet behind those public images, behind the grandeur of the Ptolemaic dynasty, lay a dark and rarely mentioned secret, a biological catastrophe quietly unfolding behind palace doors. This was a family where political ambition overrode nature itself. Power was to remain within the family, absolutely and unflinchingly. Siblings married siblings, uncles married nieces, cousins married cousins. For nearly 3 centuries, this relentless cycle of inbreeding continued without pause, generation after generation. By the time Cleopatra was born, around 69 BCE, she inherited more than just a golden crown. She inherited the accumulated genetic consequences of 15 generations of repeated close relative marriages. Modern scientists have a way of measuring just how dangerous this can become, called the coefficient of inbreeding. A child born to first cousins scores roughly 6%. Historically, most royal families, cautious even in their obsession with bloodlines, tried to stay under 10%. Cleopatra's family, her inbreeding coefficient soared above 45%. That's staggering. To give perspective, consider King Charles II of Spain, the famously ill-fated last Habsburg ruler whose genetic number was only 25%. Charles's body tells a story of extreme suffering. He couldn't walk until age 8. His tongue was so enlarged he could barely speak, and his jaw protruded so far his teeth never met. He had to swallow food whole because chewing was impossible. When he died at 38, the autopsy revealed almost no blood in his veins, a heart shriveled to the size of a peppercorn, lungs corroded, intestines gangrenous. And yet Cleopatra's coefficient was nearly double that of Charles II. How does that happen? It's all a matter of homozygosity. Normally, a child receives one set of genes from the mother and one from the father. If one parent carries a genetic flaw, the other parent's healthy gene often compensates, serving as a biological safety net. But in the case of repeated sibling unions, there is no safety net. Both parents may carry identical genetic flaws, and these flaws amplify over generations. The result? Physical deformities, cognitive impairments, weakened immune systems, organ failures, and early death. Geneticists today recognize this as one of the most dangerous experiments a family can perform on its own bloodline. So the burning question emerges. If Cleopatra carried nearly twice the genetic burden of Charles II, why do historical accounts describe her as vibrant, eloquent, and commanding? Roman writers praised her intelligence, political savvy, and charm. Was she an extraordinary exception, a once-in-a-million genetic miracle? Or have we misunderstood the evidence, reading her history with assumptions that fail to account for the invisible, complicated truths of her bloodline? The answer remains a mystery, one that forces us to confront both the fascination and the horror behind the Ptolemaic family's relentless pursuit of power. The search for answers in a forgotten tomb. For decades, archaeologists assumed they'd never find Cleopatra. Her tomb was supposedly lost under modern Alexandria, destroyed by earthquakes and tidal waves centuries ago.
The tomb is missing. When Cleopatra's palace is found underwater by archaeologist Frank Gaudio,
most scholars had given up. The ocean had swallowed her. Time had erased her. Case closed. But one person refused to accept that answer. She knew how to find people who didn't want to be found. And when she read about Cleopatra, something clicked. This wasn't history. This was an unsolved case. Martinez asked herself a simple question. If you were Cleopatra, knowing Rome wanted to parade your body through the streets as a trophy, where would you hide? Not in Alexandria. Every scholar in the world had searched there. The royal quarter sat underwater now, buried under modern buildings and Mediterranean waves. Too public, too exposed, too easy for grave robbers and conquerors to find. Cleopatra was smarter than that. She spent her entire life outmaneuvering enemies. Why would her final move be predictable? Martinez started reading ancient sources differently. Plutarch mentioned that Cleopatra and Mark Antony wanted to be buried together. Other texts hinted at a sacred temple dedicated to Osiris, the god of the afterlife, a place connected to Isis, the goddess Cleopatra claimed to embody. That's when Martinez found references to Taposiris Magna, a temple complex 30 miles west of Alexandria. Most archaeologists dismissed it as a minor religious site, nothing special. But Martinez saw something they didn't. The temple's name literally means Great Tomb of Osiris. The location was remote but accessible.
In the 13th century BC, the pharaoh Seti I was building his temple here in Abydos, when, according to some accounts, he had an encounter with the god Osiris.
Sacred but defensible. Close enough to Alexandria to make sense, far enough to avoid attention. She went there in 2005. The site was crumbling, half buried under sand and debris. Local officials thought she was wasting her time. Other archaeologists rolled their eyes. But Martinez didn't care. She had a theory, and she was going to test it. For years, she dug. Her team uncovered coins with Cleopatra's face. They found statues, jewelry, and pottery from the right time period. Each discovery suggested this place mattered more than anyone realized, but nothing prepared them for what came in 2022. Martinez's team was excavating beneath the temple when they hit something solid. Limestone bedrock. They kept digging, and then suddenly the rock opened up, a tunnel. But calling it a tunnel doesn't do it justice. This was engineering on a scale that defied explanation. The passage stretched over 4,300 feet through solid rock, nearly a mile. It sat 40 feet underground, carved with geometric precision. Parts of it were flooded, but the structure remained intact after more than 2,000 years. Archaeologists brought in experts to study the design. They compared it to the Eupalinian aqueduct on the Greek island of Samos, one of the engineering wonders of the ancient world. The techniques matched. The precision matched. Someone had invested enormous resources into building this hidden passage. But why? You don't carve through a mile of unstable bedrock for a minor temple. You don't flood your workforce with gold and labor for a side project. This tunnel represented years of secret construction, probably done at night, away from Roman eyes. Martinez's theory crystallized. Cleopatra knew she was running out of time. After Mark Antony's defeat at Actium in 31 BCE, she had maybe a year before Octavian's forces arrived. She needed a plan. A tomb in Alexandria would be ransacked within days. But ground-penetrating radar suggests it leads to a chamber, something big, something that was meant to stay hidden forever. Martinez believes she's standing at the entrance to Cleopatra's real tomb. But while the world watches Martinez dig deeper into that tunnel, another group of scientists made a discovery thousands of miles away. They found a tomb in Turkey. They found bones, and they thought those bones would finally reveal Cleopatra's DNA. They were wrong, but what they discovered instead was somehow even more disturbing. The sister who almost won history remembers Cleopatra as the clever one, the survivor. But she had a younger sister who was just as dangerous. Her name was Arsinoe IV. When civil war broke out in Egypt, Cleopatra was forced into exile. Arsinoe saw her chance. She claimed the throne and actually led an army against Julius Caesar when he arrived in Egypt. For a teenage girl in the ancient world, that's extraordinary. She trapped Caesar inside the royal palace and came very close to winning. But Caesar eventually crushed the rebellion. Arsinoe was captured, chained, and dragged to Rome as a prisoner. She was forced to march through the streets during Caesar's triumph, a public humiliation designed to show Rome's power over Egypt. Here's where it gets interesting. The Roman crowds felt sorry for her. They saw a young girl in chains, and they wept. That sympathy saved her life. Instead of execution, she was exiled to Ephesus in modern-day Turkey to live under the protection of the Temple of Artemis. Sacred ground, supposedly untouchable. She thought she was safe. She wasn't. Years later, after Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra partnered with Mark Antony, and she had unfinished business. In 41 BCE, Antony sent assassins to the temple. They dragged Arsinoe out and killed her on the sacred steps. It was a scandal that shocked the ancient world. Killing someone inside a temple violated every religious law. But for Cleopatra, it was necessary. As long as Arsinoe lived, she remained a threat to the throne. For historians, though, this assassination provided something valuable: a location. We knew exactly where Arsinoe died, and if we could find her remains, we could analyze her DNA, which would be almost identical to Cleopatra's. In the 1930s, archaeologists in Ephesus discovered an unusual tomb called the Octagon. Inside was a skeleton. The age seemed right young adult. The time frame matched. Could this be Arsinoe IV? If so, we had struck gold. We could finally answer questions about Cleopatra's ethnicity, her health, and her genetic makeup. We had a biological map, but science, as always, had other plans. The boy who wasn't supposed to exist. For decades, scholars studied the Ephesus skeleton and made assumptions.
And one of the strange things about the discoveries in Lovelock Cave is that the skeletons were often found with red hair.
Some claimed the bone structure proved African ancestry. Others argued it showed Greek heritage. Everyone had a theory, but nobody had definitive proof that the DNA was too contaminated from years of handling. Then, in 2022, a team from the University of Vienna found the skull sitting forgotten in a storage room. It had been there for decades, untouched, undocumented. This was the breakthrough they needed. Using advanced micro-CT scanning technology, they mapped every detail of the bone structure. Then they drilled into the petrous temporal bone, the hardest part of the skull, the place where DNA survives longest. In January 2025, the results were published. And they destroyed everything we thought we knew. The skeleton isn't Arsinoe, it isn't a 20-year-old woman, it isn't African, it isn't even female. The DNA showed a Y chromosome. This is a boy, an adolescent, probably between 11 and 14 years old, and not just any boy, a sick one. The scans revealed severe developmental disorders. His jaw was deformed, his skull was asymmetrical. He likely suffered from something like Treacher-Collins syndrome or severe rickets. Even stranger, his genetic markers don't match Egypt. They trace back to Italy or Sardinia. So who was he? Why was he buried in one of the most prestigious tombs in the ancient world? Why did someone build a hero's monument for a deformed Italian child and bury him in Turkey? Nobody knows. But here's what we do know. The so-called proof of Cleopatra's African heritage was based on bad science and wishful thinking. The skeleton everyone studied for decades had nothing to do with her family. We're back to square one, and that means going back to historical records, and those records tell a story far more disturbing than anyone expected. The genetic time bomb called Ptolemy. If you want to understand what Cleopatra was up against, you need to meet her great-granduncle. His name was Ptolemy VIII, and the Romans called him Physcon, which means potbelly. But that nickname doesn't capture the full horror. Historical sources describe him as massively obese, so heavy that he couldn't walk on his own. Servants had to hold him up. His neck was swollen, his eyes bulged out of his skull, he struggled to breathe. Modern doctors looking at these descriptions see something specific: Graves' disease. It's an autoimmune disorder that attacks the thyroid gland, flooding the body with hormones. It causes the signature symptoms: bulging eyes, swollen neck, and extreme weight gain. But Graves' disease doesn't just destroy your body, it messes with your mind. Patients experience manic energy, insomnia, rapid speech, impulsive decision-making, and sudden mood swings. Now think about Cleopatra. Ancient historians praised her for having boundless energy. They said she could work through the night without rest. She was always on the move, always thinking, always planning. We've always framed this as brilliance. But what if it wasn't brilliance? What if it were a symptom? What if the legendary fire inside Cleopatra, the charisma, the intensity, the relentless drive, was actually her thyroid gland destroying her from the inside? She wouldn't have known what was happening. Ancient Egyptians had no concept of autoimmune disease.
Egypt, because Egypt, even if you accept the conventional timeline of Egypt, which is 2500 BC for the Great Pyramid,
all she would have known is that she couldn't stop moving, couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. Her heart would race, her hands would shake. She'd feel like she was burning alive from the inside out. And there's more. The Ptolemaic family showed other patterns too: joint problems, bone deformities, chronic pain. The same issues that plagued the Habsburgs centuries later. So if Cleopatra inherited all of these bulging eyes, swollen neck, joint pain, metabolic chaos, how did she convince the world she was a goddess? The answer lies in Egypt's greatest secret, its mastery of medicine and chemistry. The queen who became her own pharmacist, Egypt, wasn't just famous for pyramids and gold. It was the pharmaceutical capital of the ancient world. And Cleopatra had access to all of it. If she suffered from chronic pain, the kind of bone and joint agony that comes from genetic disorders, she would have turned to opium. Egypt grew massive poppy fields specifically for this purpose. Opium was the ancient world's ultimate painkiller. One dose could numb pain for hours. Did Cleopatra use it? We'll probably never know for certain. But consider this: she had to stand for hours during royal ceremonies. She had to project strength while negotiating with Roman generals. If her joints were screaming in pain, opium would have been the only thing that could have gotten her through those moments. Then there's Kaifi, a sacred temple incense. Ancient texts describe it as having powerful sedative effects. Plutarch wrote that its scent loosens the daily tension like untying a knot and helps people fall asleep. If Cleopatra suffered from the insomnia and mania of Graves' disease, if her mind raced at night and wouldn't let her rest, Kaifi would have been medicine, not just perfume. And then there's the blue lotus. This flower grows throughout Egypt and has mild psychoactive properties. When soaked in wine, it produces euphoria and a floating, dreamlike state. Romans who met Cleopatra described her as having an almost supernatural, magnetic, mesmerizing, and impossible to resist. Was that natural charisma? Or was it blue lotus wine mixed with adrenaline and desperation? We know for a fact that Cleopatra wrote a book about cosmetics and medicine. It was called Cosmetica, and fragments of it survived for centuries. Later physicians like Galen quoted from it. This wasn't just a vanity project. She was researching, experimenting, and testing different compounds. Why? Because she needed to hide what her genetics had done to her. If Graves' disease gave her bulging eyes, she would have used coal black eye makeup to reshape their appearance, to make them look smaller, more balanced. If her neck was swollen, she would have designed elaborate jewelry and broad collars to cover it. Every piece of her appearance was strategic. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen. She was a master of illusion, a woman using every tool available, chemistry, botany, cosmetics, theater, to project the image of a living goddess while privately treating herself like a patient in constant crisis. She painted a lie over her face every single day. And she did it so well that the lie became history. What happens when the mask comes off? This brings us back to Taposiris Magna, back to the scorching Egyptian desert where sand and silence have guarded secrets for more than 2,000 years. Back to Kathleen Martinez, the woman who has devoted nearly 20 years of her life to a single obsession: finding Cleopatra's lost tomb. Martinez is closer than anyone in modern history has ever been. And yet, the closer she gets, the heavier the question becomes. Because after everything we now know about Cleopatra's genetics, about the long history of illness and inbreeding within the Ptolemaic family, about the chemical knowledge Cleopatra may have used simply to stay alive, what will Martinez actually uncover if that final wall is broken? This search began with a legend. For centuries, the world has chased an image: the irresistible seductress, the unmatched beauty, the living incarnation of the goddess Isis. But science has a way of stripping myths down to their bones. And science is preparing us for a version of Cleopatra that may feel uncomfortable, even shocking. If Martinez finds the tomb, if that sarcophagus is opened, the remains inside may tell a very different story. She may find a woman who was physically small, perhaps even fragile. There may be signs of deformities carefully concealed during Cleopatra's life through clothing, posture, makeup, and elaborate jewelry. Instead of treasures meant to display vanity, there may be bottles of medicine, jars of chemical compounds, salves, ointments, and tools meant for survival. Objects that whisper not of luxury, but of daily struggle. And yet, here is the paradox: none of this makes her legacy weaker, it makes it stronger. Because think about what Cleopatra achieved. She mastered 9 languages while possibly battling a body that betrayed her. She negotiated with Rome's most ruthless generals while enduring physical suffering we can barely imagine. She stood toe-to-toe with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, commanding attention and loyalty while potentially hiding her own vulnerabilities beneath layers of gold and symbolism. She didn't just rule an empire. She outlasted forces political, military, and biological that should have crushed her. Every day of her reign may have been an act of sheer willpower. Survival was not accidental, it was intentional. But for now, certainty remains buried. The tunnel still waits. The technology exists. The moment is approaching. The real question is whether we are ready for the truth. Because when that tomb opens, if it opens, we won't just be rewriting history books. We will be forced to face a Cleopatra who is far more complex, far more painful, and far more human than the myth we have worshipped for 2,000 years. And once the mask comes off, there may be no turning back. Cleopatra's story was never about beauty. It was about power, and the power to control how people see you is sometimes the most dangerous weapon of all. For centuries, we believed the image she created was the perfect queen, the flawless seductress, the goddess walking among mortals. But DNA doesn't lie. Genetics doesn't care about propaganda, and the numbers tell us that Cleopatra should have been a medical catastrophe, not a historical legend. Yet somehow, she wasn't. Somehow, she became one of the most influential figures in human history. And whether that happened because she won the genetic lottery or because she fought harder than anyone realized, that makes her story even more powerful. The DNA sequences sit ready, and somewhere beneath the Egyptian sand, Cleopatra is keeping her final secret. When that secret finally comes to light, when we see her face for the first time in 2,000 years, we'll have to make a choice. Do we destroy the myth and accept the truth? Or do we realize that the truth, broken body, fierce mind, chemical warfare against her own genetics, makes her the most impressive ruler in ancient history? What do you think? When they open that tomb, what will they find? And does it change how you see her story? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want to follow this mystery to the end, hit that subscribe button, because when Kathleen Martinez breaks through that final wall, you'll want to be here for it.